Let's continue our analysis and bring in Melinda Haring, who's Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre. Melinda, thank you for being with us here in France 24. We appreciate your time as always. What do you read into this idea of the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong Un? What's your take on it?
It shows just how desperate Vladimir Putin is. It's not hard to remember a few years ago we had smiling pictures of Vladimir Putin at G7 meetings. Now he's isolated and has so few friends, and he's having to go to one of the worst bad guys in the world and beg for ammo. So I see it as one more sign of Putin's extreme isolation as a result of the war in Ukraine.
Russia turning to North Korea for military aid, as you point out. It does seem like a very strange turnaround in events. What do you think it reveals about the state of Russia's military right now?
That's the money question. So it says that Putin also needs ammo. There's been many reports about how the Ukrainians are low on shells, which is true, of course, but we know less about the Russian side. We know the Russians have been firing at a much higher rate than the Ukrainians. So the fact that Putin is meeting with North Korea and has his hand outstretched and is begging for ammo says a lot about the Russian state of readiness as well.
It's also quite a strange thing to imagine that a state like North Korea, which we are led to believe often struggles to feed its population, is able to provide things like this to a country like Russia.
They certainly don't lack the kind of military supplies that they need. But yeah, it's a fair point. Look, I think the broader point, though, is that these kinds of I'm struggling to use the right adjective. Odious regimes have relationships, and they always reinforce each other. So as Vladimir Putin grows more and more isolated, I think we can continue to see his relationships with North Korea, Iran, and these sort of state actors that are, persona non grata to the rest of the world only grow.
You've anticipated my next question very, very aptly, as usual, I think, Melinda. It's one of your aptitudes, I note. In terms of what this means for the next axis that forms, do you think you will see this grow more, this relationship between Russia, North Korea, Iran, the others, whoever the others might turn out to be, China?
Absolutely. Vladimir Putin doesn't have any friends. His isolation is growing. And as sanctions begin to tighten and it's more difficult for Russia to gain the kind of technology that they need in order to make weapons, I think that they will continue to shore up these relations with North Korea, Iran, and other odious regimes.
Are you getting a sense, Melinda, that the Ukraine counteroffensive is making good progress? There are many reports that say it isn't. There are some in certain areas who are calling for negotiations and a big compromise. I'm thinking in terms of here in France, for instance, former President Nicolas Sarkozy is saying Ukraine's really got to face up to the fact it's going to lose its territory and make peace. One might say he's just trying to get back in the headlines himself, but that's another matter. Are you getting a sense that the counteroffensive is actually making the breakthroughs that some say it is?
Absolutely. I think this is a really interesting point. So Ukraine announced over the weekend that one of the big generals there said, we are finally making our way through the first line of defense in Zaporizhia Oblast. Ukraine is trying to retake 4 different oblasts. Zaporizhia is the most important one for breaking the land bridge and making sure that Ukraine has access to its ports. So the Ukrainian side has made its way through the first line of Russian defense. But look, it's going to be hard. There's 3 layers of defense. And the Russians had a year to build defensive systems. But the French are totally wrong. The French are out to lunch, I'm sorry to say. There's an inverse relationship between how well the Ukrainians are doing on the battlefield. So if the Ukrainians do well on the battlefield, then the Russians will push and ask for, they'll indicate that they're willing to negotiate. And you'll see in the media ether more and more people talk about how the time is right for negotiations. So I would be suspicious of anyone who suggests now is time for negotiations while the Ukrainians begin to make real progress. And we've been waiting for this progress for 3 months now.
Indeed. I need to clarify that when I said the French, it was the former French President Nicolas Sarkozy who was suggesting that, not the current President Macron. A very different approach indeed. I think Macron's support is still as strong as that of, say, US President Joe Biden. Are things starting to change, though, in the US, Melinda? Are you getting that sense that in some quarters, as we move towards the presidential election in the US, people are starting to reassess how things should progress?
So right now, all eyes are on the next vote on Ukraine in Congress. And the column to watch are Republican House members, and there's more than 30 of them, and I'm not sure how they're going to vote. So at this point, I think that Ukraine will get the money it needs from Congress, but we don't know yet. We're starting to see some weird things. We're starting to see people express concerns about aid, but at the highest levels with President Biden, support is very strong. Now, if the worst case scenario happens and Donald Trump is reelected, that is going to be earth shattering. That is going to destroy the consensus around Ukraine. He's going to zero out assistance for Ukraine, and he will try to pull up the United States out of NATO. So that would be, an earth-shattering deal if Trump were reelected from a foreign policy perspective.
Melinda Haring of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, Deputy Director, thank you, as always, for joining us here for France 24. We always appreciate your time and your analysis. Melinda Haring there. Thank you.